Hi, my name is Lou Trolio, and welcome to the video session, The Benefits of Active Listening. What I'd like to cover in this particular video is the definition of active listening. We'll go through some examples, recommendations, expectations around the skill of active listening, and ultimately we'll wrap it up at the end with a summary. So what is active listening? Active listening is really just recommunicating the words and the actual emotions of an individual. So the words and the actual feelings. And this was actually developed by Dr. Thomas Gordon. One thing to really consider around active listening is that you're not parroting, you're not repeating word for word the phrase that the individual just gave you. You're actually recommunicating the words and the actual feelings of that individual, yet you're using your own words to describe what you've just heard. And this is a very, very powerful skill and has a lot of great business benefits that we're going to cover in this particular video. Typically, you active listen when someone else's needs aren't being met. They come to you with a problem, they're concerned, they're nervous, they're afraid, they're frustrated, whatever it may be. And the goal of active listening is really to get them to a point where they feel you get them. They feel as though you understand what their situation is, and by receiving active listening responses allows them to say, you know what? They get what I'm saying right now, and I can give them more information. So let's take a look at a couple of examples around active listening. The first example, I can't believe the API team hasn't responded to my request. A lot of times, the response that would be given to that particular phrase to another individual is something along the lines of, well, wow, you should really let Bob know about this, or you should let Sue know about this. It's really their responsibility. And notice in this case, someone has come to you with a problem and you're providing the solution. You're telling them exactly what they need to do. And we know, based on some of the other videos, that the goal is from coaching to create an environment where someone else can solve their own problems, right? So the active listening response in this case would be something along the lines of, wow, you seem really frustrated that they're putting you behind schedule, right? I'm recommunicating what they said. I didn't repeat word for word. I used my own words to describe what they said, and then I added the emotion or the feeling along with it. Let's take a look at another example. If we don't hit this milestone, the group won't receive their bonus. You know, everything's going to be fine. You'll be fine. This has happened in the past. It's all going to work out. This is an example where someone is concerned, right? Or someone is nervous that they're not going to get their bonus. And typically what people do is that they want to make people feel better, so they give empathy. And they almost, in a way, brush off the fact that it's not that big of a deal. Right? Everything's going to be okay. That's not a horrible statement in and of itself, but it doesn't get to you where you want to be when you active listen. And active listening doesn't agree with someone, you're not disagreeing with someone, you're simply recommunicating the words and the actual feelings of that particular individual so that they can give you more information about their particular situation. Let's take a look at the final example. I submitted my expense report, but it still hasn't been approved. Right? And this is something that I've done over and over and over again until I really learned the skill of active listening, is that I would ask a ton of questions, almost as if I was a detective, right? The who, what, when, where, and why. Give me all the information about this particular situation, and I'll be sure to give you a solution to your problem once I have all the information. Well, first, it's almost impossible to have all the information about a particular situation. We can't get into other people's heads. Second of all, why am I trying to solve the problem, right? Why aren't I creating an environment where someone else can solve their own problem? So by active listening and giving a response such as, wow, you seem really concerned you're not going to get reimbursement in a timely manner, just again reinforces that I get what they're saying and that they can give me more information about the particular situation. Now, these phrases, I can tell you, the active listening phrases, in the beginning for me were very, very awkward. And we're going to talk about why that is in a second. So what's the business benefit really of active listening, right? We know that we don't want to solve other people's problems, but what we also know is that when people are upset or concerned or in an environment where they have a lot of interference in their head, people don't think clearly. So active listening is really a skill which creates an environment to calm the other person down. They feel like, okay, this person gets me. Let me tell them a little bit more about the story. Ultimately, you're lowering the emotional level of that particular individual. And when someone is calmer, they have a much higher chance of thinking clearly. And when they're thinking clearly, then you can start asking coaching questions to see where they're going to go from this point forward, right? So if someone's upset, I active listen, and then I start asking coaching questions such as, so what are you going to do from here? What are some ideas you have? Right? It allows them to say, yeah, I can think clearly now because I'm calm. If I started with those questions right off the gate, they would probably give me a response such as, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. This is crazy, right? I can't believe that these people aren't getting back to me, right? And they're not in a great state of mind to come up with their own solution. So ultimately, active listening calms another individual to get them to a point where you can start asking some coaching questions. What it also does is that it prevents you from constantly giving the solution. I can tell you, when you first try to active listen, what's going to happen is you're going to have an enormous amount of interference because you're going to want to inherently start asking questions. That's the who, what, when, where, and why, right? Those are very common questions that people, as a knee-jerk reaction, ask because they want to be helpful, because they like solving other people's problems. They've been rewarded for it, they've been promoted for it. But this is a skill where if we know it's better when other people solve their own problems, this is a great skill to use to create that particular environment. Now, when I teach active listening and I do consulting around it, people seem to think that they can never ask questions. And that's not true at all, right? You may, on occasion, have to ask clarification questions. A clarification question would be something to the effect of, tell me more about this situation. What do you mean that they're never getting back to you, right? Avoiding some very general terms and asking for more specifics of a particular individual. But you're not asking the questions because you're going to solve the problem for them. You're asking the questions so that they can articulate it themselves. And by having someone articulate it and almost listening to what they're hearing, you'd be amazed as to the types of ideas they pop in their head to start solving their own problems on their own. So active listening doesn't mean that you can never ask any questions. You can ask clarification questions as long as the intent of it is to have someone else articulate the problem for themselves and ultimately calm themselves down and maybe even solve the problem on their own. I cannot stress enough how hard and awkward and uncomfortable this skill is going to be in the very beginning. When I tried it, I thought this was crazy. I thought it was ridiculous. I thought no one talks like this. I certainly don't talk like this. And it just wasn't part of my personality. So I started to dismiss it. But as I reflected upon what the goal is of active listening, which is really to calm another person to get them to a point where they can solve the problem on their own, I realized that I was doing a disservice to people by just jumping in and giving solutions, or by asking a bunch of detective-like questions so that I could solve the problem for themselves. Now, that's not to say that I never give the answers to anything, right? If you active listen and you find out that this person has tried 3 or 4 different strategies to solve a problem, then maybe they really don't know what to do. And by all means, give them the answer. I've absolutely run into situations where in the very beginning, I was active listening too much and almost ignoring the warning signs where someone really didn't ultimately know what to do, even though they tried a couple of different ideas. So please understand that when you active listen, it's going to be weird. I would recommend starting off active listening to your family. Choose safe environments that you feel like you would be able to try the active listening skill, but know that people are probably going to look at you a little funny because they're used to you giving advice or asking questions. And I can tell you it's going to feel very uncomfortable in the beginning, but it's a great skill to start to use in your arsenal if you want to be a better coach and you want to create more possibilities for other people to solve their own problems. So to summarize, active listening is, on the surface, it seems easy, but it's very, very difficult, and it's a great skill. And that's a skill that has to be practiced. So know that the first 50 to 100 times, it's going to feel awkward. But ultimately, as you start to build it as part of your strategy when someone else is upset, it's a great skill to have because it creates an environment where someone else can really solve their own problem. And that's really the business benefit of this, is that, ultimately we don't want to give the answer. And sometimes we feel like when people are upset, we want to give them the answer to make them feel better. And that ultimately could be more of a harmful thing to do or a disservice when we know that people are more likely to execute their own solutions because it was their idea in the first place. And allowing someone to really create an environment where they can solve their own problems, they'll become a lot more autonomous, a lot more independent, and ultimately you'll get a lot more time back in your day because you're creating an environment where they're able to solve the problems on their own. So I'd like to thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed this video. And as always, my friends, good coaching. Have a great day.